Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, we have absolutely all been there. You're sitting at your desk just staring at a totally blank document, or maybe you're standing in a doorway looking at a ridiculously cluttered room and you just feel entirely, completely frozen, right? The weight of that unfinished task is literally pressing down on you. It's such a painfully relatable picture. And look, it's not that you don't want to be productive. It doesn't mean you don't care about the outcome or the deadline. It's just that the mountain in front of you looks way too steep to climb today, and your brain just flat out refuses to take that first step. What you're experiencing is actually a form of cognitive overload. See, your brain is trying to process all the steps required to finish this massive task from start to finish all at once. And the sheer volume of that effort, it triggers a freeze response. You're basically stuck at the base of the mountain, totally unable to move.
So I want you to ask yourself a very simple, hope-filled question. What if you only needed 5 minutes? Today we're diving into a remarkably gentle, really low-stakes psychological tool drawn straight from our source material. It's a daily reset, and it's designed not to force you to climb that whole mountain at once, but to completely bypass those massive mental roadblocks keeping you stuck. It's really all about outsmarting that cognitive overload we just talked about, using a method that requires almost zero willpower to get started.
Part 1. The Wall of Overwhelm. Staring at the Unfinished.
Let's just slow down for a second and really acknowledge how heavy and static that feeling of overwhelm actually is. When a task feels massive, our natural human instinct isn't to tackle it piece by piece. Our instinct is to avoid the discomfort entirely. The source text we're unpacking today really recognizes this deep paralysis. Listen, you aren't lazy. You are just overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the expectation you've built up in your own head. We're constantly choosing between two states. On one side, we've got weeks of procrastination, that heavy, exhausting, kind of gray burden of long-term avoidance. It drains your energy in the background all day, every day, even when you aren't actively trying to work. It just sits there in your subconscious, making you feel guilty while you're just trying to watch TV or eat dinner. But then, on the other side, we have a 5-minute commitment. Notice how remarkably different that feels? It's tiny, it's immediate, it's a warm, dynamic little spark of momentum. The beauty of the data we're analyzing is that it highlights how dropping a heavy, week-long burden in favor of a tiny, immediate action literally changes the whole game.
Part 2. The 5-Minute Promise. A simple daily reset. The real secret here, and the core message of the source text, is that the solution to week-long procrastination is absolutely not to force some massive, grueling workflow. The answer is definitely not locking yourself in a room for 6 hours of unbroken, painful focus. No way. It's simply about making an intentionally small daily promise to yourself, a low-stakes daily reset. The 5-minute rule is basically defined as a gentle commitment to work on an overwhelming task for just 5 minutes. That's it, nothing more. By framing the task as this incredibly brief micro-commitment, you actually stop your brain from triggering its own avoidance alarms. You are essentially sneaking right past the defensive guards of your own anxiety. When you tell yourself you only have to work for 5 minutes, that internal monologue that's screaming, "This is too hard" or "This is going to take too long," is immediately silenced. You shrink the perceived threat down to something so totally insignificant that your brain doesn't even bother to fight it.
Let's ground this concept in physical reality for a second. What does 5 minutes actually entail? Well, it means the quick, simple win of just opening your laptop and letting it boot up. Or, writing one single sentence of that intimidating report. Or maybe just putting away 3 items in one single corner of a messy room. Think of it like a quick cut in a film, transitioning from someone sitting idly in distraction straight into the act of doing just one of these tiny, manageable things. These are highly achievable small wins. They don't take a whole afternoon. They take mere minutes, but they genuinely have the power to entirely transform the trajectory of your day. The beauty is in the extreme simplicity of it all. You aren't committing to finishing the report, you're committing to typing the first word. You aren't committing to a spotless house, you're just committing to clearing off one chair.
Part 3. Bypassing brain resistance. Why shrinking the commitment works.
Now, this is where the mechanics of this rule get truly fascinating and honestly incredibly empowering. Why does telling yourself only 5 minutes actually work to break weeks of a freeze response? According to the text, it all comes down to the way our minds process perceived effort. The core mechanic is beautifully simple. Your brain stops resisting because the commitment feels small. See, when you look at a massive project, your brain calculates a massive amount of effort, a huge time drain, and a really high potential for failure or frustration. So, it resists. It actively tries to protect you from that energy expenditure by pushing you toward easier, instantly gratifying activities, like, say, endlessly scrolling through your phone. But when you promise yourself just 5 minutes,
the threat completely vanishes. This simple psychological trick effectively disarms your fear of the effort, because anyone, no matter how tired, stressed, or unmotivated they are, can do 5 minutes. The mental resistance simply evaporates because the brain realizes that a 5-minute exertion is absolutely not a threat to your energy reserves. You've lowered the bars so much that tripping over it is literally impossible.
Part 4. From 5 to 40, a student's story.
To really cement how powerful this framework is, the source provides a fantastic, highly relatable real-world example. Take the case study of a student battling severe, paralyzing procrastination. They were entirely stuck, just staring at their unfinished coursework, completely unable to begin studying for an impending assignment. Their journey into productivity started with step 1, making that simple, gentle promise. Just 5 minutes of studying, nothing more. Step 2, that tiny promise alone allowed them to overcome their initial heavy resistance. Because it was only 5 minutes, sitting down at the desk was suddenly totally doable. But here is where the magic actually happens. Step 3, they didn't stop at 5. They ended up working for 40 solid minutes. And step 4, because of that newfound momentum, they finally finished the assignment. The action simply snowballed. What began as a micro-commitment turned into a highly productive session solely because the pressure to perform perfectly for hours was completely removed.
40. A mere 5-minute promise transformed into 40 minutes of solid, uninterrupted progress. Once the psychological barrier of entry was removed by keeping the stakes so low, the student found that they actually had the energy and the focus to keep going. The hardest part wasn't the studying itself, it was simply the act of crossing the starting line. You know, physics tells us that an object at rest stays at rest, but an object in motion stays in motion. Well, the exact same principle applies to our psychology. The friction is entirely at the beginning. Once you are 5 minutes into a task, the anxiety of starting is already behind you. You're already in the environment, you already have your materials out, and suddenly continuing for another 35 minutes feels infinitely easier than it did when you were lying on the couch dreading the whole thing.
Part 5. Action creates momentum. The shift to progress.
This brings us right to the climax and really the core philosophy of this entire explainer. Imagine that shift in your own life, going from being trapped in distraction, scrolling endlessly on your device, to suddenly being at your desk in a state of full, focused action. What actually causes that shift? Well, as the data shows us, it isn't waiting around for a sudden magical burst of motivation to strike you like lightning. It all comes down to this core philosophy. Action creates momentum. This is perhaps the single most empowering message we can take away today. We have this fundamental misunderstanding of how motivation works, don't we? We think we need to feel motivated in order to take action, but the psychology shows it is exactly the opposite. You do not need to feel motivated to start. You just need to start, and the motivation will organically follow. The mind rapidly shifts from a state of stubborn resistance to a state of flowing progress, but only after you've taken that very first low-stakes 5-minute step. The action itself generates the energy required to keep going.
Part 6. Your daily reset. Applying the rule today.
Let's bring this right back to you. We've looked at the underlying psychology and the data from the student's case study, but the real value of an explainer like this is how you apply it to your immediate, everyday reality. You have something looming over you right now, don't you? Something you're staring at, feeling entirely stuck? Well, here is the simple breakdown for your own daily reset based on everything we've learned. First, pick just one task today that you have been actively avoiding. Second, give it only 5 minutes. Set a timer if you have to. And here is the absolutely most crucial part of this entire framework. Give yourself full, guilt-free permission to walk away when that timer goes off. Seriously, if 5 minutes is up and you want to stop, you stop. You kept your promise to yourself. But third, watch your mind shift. You will be absolutely surprised by how quickly your brain transitions from dreading the work to actually being engaged in progress. More often than not, just like the student, you're going to choose to keep going because the hardest part is already over.
I want to leave you with one final question to think about. What one thing will you give 5 minutes to today? Don't plan to finish it. Don't plan to conquer the world. Just find your 5 minutes, try this gentle daily reset, and let the momentum take care of the rest.